In Makira, the night was full of lights, music, and laughter. Everyone had gathered to honor Mr. Obiero, the well-known banker who was finally retiring after decades of service. The hall was decorated with golden drapes and shining glasses, and the air carried the pride of a man who had built his name with hard work. At the family table, Lena, his eldest daughter, sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was proud of her father, yet inside her heart was restless. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, but something told her it wouldn't be simple. When the time came, Mr. Obiero rose to give his speech. All the guests leaned forward, expecting warm words about his journey and maybe a few words of gratitude for his family. But instead, his eyes turned toward Lena. With a mocking smile, he began to speak, not of love or pride, but of her mistakes. He called out her failed business attempts, her struggles, and her lack of success. His words cut through the hall like a cold wind. "A disappointment," he said, and his voice carried across the room. Laughter broke out among some of the guests, soft at first, then louder, filling the space with humiliation. Lena's chest tightened as if someone had stolen her breath. She sat frozen, her cheeks burning, her heart breaking in front of everyone she wished would see her worth. The night that was meant to honor her father had turned into a cruel stage for her pain. Lena sat still, her body trembling, but she forced herself not to break down. Her eyes burned with tears that threatened to spill, yet she bit her lip and held them back. In that glittering hall, filled with music and laughter, she felt smaller than ever. Her father's words echoed inside her head, each one sharper than the last. He had not just mocked her failures. He had stripped her of her dignity in front of hundreds of people. She looked toward her mother, desperate for a sign of comfort, but her mother lowered her gaze, pretending not to notice. That silence hurt more than the insults. The woman who had once held her when she cried now sat quietly, too ashamed or too weak to defend her own daughter. Lena's heart sank. She had always hoped her mother would stand beside her, but tonight she realized she was completely alone. Behind her, she could hear the whispers of her younger siblings. Their hushed voices were like daggers, cutting deeper into her already wounded heart. She could feel their mocking smiles without even turning around. They had always compared themselves to her, always found joy in her struggles, and now, with their father leading the humiliation, they joined in the cruel chorus. Every second felt unbearable. The laughter around her seemed louder, the lights brighter, the air heavier. She wanted nothing more than to escape, to run out of that hall and hide somewhere no one could see her tears. But the hall was packed, every eye fixed on her, waiting to see her reaction. If she stood up now, it would only feed their gossip. If she cried, they would never let her forget. So she sat there, her back straight but her heart collapsing inside her chest. Her palms were damp, her throat tight, and her mind screaming for relief. She wondered why her father, the man she had once admired, would choose this night to destroy her. Was her love for him never enough? Did her efforts, her struggles, her silent battles mean nothing to him? Her chest ached with the weight of unspoken words. She wanted to shout, to tell them about the nights she stayed awake working, the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had chased even when the world laughed at her. But she stayed silent, swallowing her pain like poison. In that moment, Lena felt invisible, unwanted, unloved. Surrounded by glitter and applause for her father, she sat in a cage of humiliation. She realized that the cruelest kind of pain is not when strangers mock you, but when your own family becomes the source of your deepest wounds. And that night, her father had wounded her in a way she would never forget. Kato sat beside Lena, his jaw tight, his fists curling under the table where no one could see. He had been silent all evening, watching the event unfold, but his silence was not weakness. It was boiling anger. Every word that came out of Mr. Obiero's mouth had been like a slap to his wife, and Kato felt each one of them as if they had been thrown at him too. He had seen Lena at her lowest, when her business dreams fell apart, when people mocked her, when nights turned into battles of tears and hope. But through it all, she never gave up her heart. She remained kind, generous, and full of love. And now, to sit here and watch her own father tear her down in front of a hall full of people, it was more than Kato could stand. He turned his eyes toward her. Lena sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. To the crowd she appeared calm, but Cato knew her too well. He could see the storm inside her. The way she was breaking quietly while pretending to be strong crushed him. This was the woman he had promised to protect, the woman he vowed to stand by, and tonight, she needed him more than ever. Cato's chest tightened as he looked around the hall. Hundreds of faces had laughed at her humiliation. These were people who didn't know her struggles, people who would never understand her sleepless nights or her sacrifices. Yet, they felt entitled to laugh at her pain because her own father had opened the door for them. The injustice of it all burned inside him like fire. He leaned closer to Lena, lowering his voice so only she could hear. His words came out calm, but they carried the weight of his decision. Enough is enough. Tonight truth will speak. Lena's eyes shifted toward him, confused and afraid. She had never seen that look in his eyes before. So steady, so certain, so full of quiet power. For a moment, it was as if his strength wrapped around her fragile heart, reminding her she wasn't as alone as she thought. Cato straightened in his chair, his shoulders squared, his mind already made up. He wasn't a man who loved drama, but he loved justice. And tonight, justice belonged to his wife. He thought about all the good she had done that nobody knew, how she had given when she had little, how she had carried others while hiding her own pain. She was worth more than any insult, more than any failure her father chose to mock. As he sat there, watching Obiero bask in his own pride, Cato knew the moment was coming. Soon he would stand. Soon he would speak. And when he did, the hall that had laughed at Lena would fall silent. Tonight would not end with her shame. Tonight would end with her truth. When Mr. Obiero finally ended his long speech, the hall erupted in applause. Some clapped out of habit, others out of respect for his years of service, but everyone was still buzzing from the sting of his words about Lena. The master of ceremony, smiling politely, invited Cato to share a short toast as the son-in-law. People expected the usual. Kind words, praises for Obiero's career, maybe a story or two. Nothing controversial, nothing dramatic. But as Cato stood, something shifted in the room. He was not a man who enjoyed the spotlight, yet tonight he walked toward it with steady steps. He lifted his glass, his shoulders straight, his eyes firm. His presence alone commanded attention. The crowd quieted, waiting for the easy compliments they thought would come. Instead, his first words cut through the air like a blade. We celebrate a man who worked for decades, yes. But what honor is there in tearing down your own blood? Gasps rose immediately, soft at first, then spreading like a wave through the room. Every head turned toward him. Some mouths hung open in shock, others twisted in nervous smiles. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure if they had heard him correctly. Mr. Obiero himself froze, his confident smirk faltering as his eyes darted toward Cato. Cato's voice grew stronger, carrying across the hall with a calm power that silenced every whisper. A father is meant to build his children, to raise them higher than himself, to be their shield. But tonight, in this very hall, we witnessed a father mock his own daughter. What pride is there in success if it comes at the cost of your own family's dignity? The weight of his words pressed against everyone present. The laughter that had filled the hall earlier now felt like an ugly memory. Guests who had joined in shifted in their seats, ashamed. Lena sat at the table, her heart pounding, tears rising again. But this time they weren't only from pain. For the first time that night she felt seen. Cato didn't shout. He didn't rage. His tone was steady, sharp, and full of truth. Respect is not measured by titles or years of service, he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. It is measured by how you treat the people closest to you, especially when the world is watching. And tonight we all watched. The hall was silent, so quiet that the clink of a glass being set down echoed like thunder. No one moved. No one dared to laugh now. Cato lowered his glass slowly, his eyes locked on Obiero's. For the first time that evening, the retired banker looked unsettled. The toast was supposed to honor him, but instead it had turned into something else entirely. A mirror held up before him, exposing the cracks he had tried to hide. And as the silence stretched, Everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed the moment the night began to change forever. Cato let the silence hang for a moment, his eyes sweeping across the glittering hall. Everyone was waiting, restless, caught between shock and curiosity. Then he spoke again, his voice calm but filled with a quiet fire. "You call her a failure," he said, turning toward Mr. Obiero. "But let me tell you who this woman really is." The guests leaned in, some with guilt already showing on their faces. They had laughed only minutes ago, but something in Cato's tone made them uneasy. He wasn't just defending his wife, he was about to reveal something they had never imagined. "While you mocked her struggles," Cato continued, "she was out there changing lives in Kasaira village. Do you know how many children had no school? Do you know how many orphans went hungry? She built classrooms, she sponsored education, she gave them hope when no one else did. And she did it quietly, without asking for applause, without putting her name in newspapers, without boasting about it at parties." A ripple moved through the crowd, murmurs started, people exchanging uneasy glances. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed, as the weight of their earlier laughter began to sink in. "She took her pain," Cato's voice grew stronger now, "and turned it into purpose. While you counted her failed businesses, she was planting seeds of success in the lives of children who may one day rise because of her. Tell me, is that failure? Or is that the greatest success a human being can achieve?" Lena sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had never wanted recognition. Her work was from the heart, not for show. But to hear her husband lay it bare in front of all those people, people who once mocked her, made her eyes sting with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. The hall that had earlier been filled with laughter was now filled with silence, so heavy it almost pressed on everyone's shoulders. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, guilt written on their faces. Some older men cleared their throats awkwardly, while women looked at Lena with new eyes. Eyes filled with respect. One guest whispered, "She did all that?" Another muttered, "And we laughed." Slowly, heads began to bow, as if the shame was too much to bear. The very people who had found joy in her humiliation now felt exposed, guilty of mocking someone who had given more to others than they ever had. Mr. Obiero's face stiffened, his pride crumbling bit by bit. For years, he had built his identity on titles, money, and recognition. And here was his daughter, the one he had ridiculed, quietly holding a legacy greater than his own. Cato's final words struck the deepest. "You can laugh at failure, but you cannot laugh at sacrifice. Tonight, the truth stands in this room, and it is brighter than every light in this hall." The murmurs died away, replaced by silence and heavy hearts. The daughter who had been mocked was no longer the subject of ridicule, she was the symbol of quiet greatness. Cato paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink into the crowd. Then, slowly, he reached beneath the table and pulled out a folder he had carried with him. The sound of the clasp snapping open was soft, but in the silence of the hall, it seemed louder than thunder. Every guest leaned forward, curious and tense, as Cato held the folder high for all to see. Inside were papers neatly stacked, letters, reports, testimonies. He pulled one out and read aloud, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To Mrs. Lena Obiero Cato, thank you for sponsoring our village school. Because of you, 50 children who once studied under a tree now sit inside a proper classroom." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Faces turned, eyes widened, and whispers broke out. Cato didn't stop. He pulled out another letter. "From Kasaira Orphanage. We thank you for your monthly donations. Your kindness has put food on the table for children who had no one else to feed them." The master of ceremony, sensing the shift, quickly signaled to the technical team. Within seconds, the big screen at the front of the hall flickered to life. Photos began to appear. Children smiling in new classrooms, teachers standing proudly with chalkboards, orphans with bowls of food, entire communities gathered around buildings made possible by Lena's quiet generosity. The room was silent. The same people who had laughed earlier now sat frozen, eyes glued to the evidence flashing before them. The laughter that had filled the hall not long ago now felt like poison in their throats. Cato turned his gaze toward Mr. Obiero. "You called her worthless," he said, his voice low but powerful. "Yet these are the lives she has touched. These are the children she has lifted. Tell me which is truly worthless, the love that builds or the pride that destroys." Obiero's face drained of color. The proud smirk he had worn all night was gone. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his colleagues, his friends, and his relatives stared at him, not with admiration anymore, but with disappointment. Some shook their heads. Others whispered under their breath. For the first time, Obiero felt the sting of humiliation, the same sting he had forced upon his daughter. Lena sat quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She hadn't known Cato had brought proof. She had never told him to defend her this way. But in this moment, her heart swelled with both gratitude and pain. Gratitude that someone finally spoke her truth, and pain that it had to be spoken in front of strangers before her own father would see her worth. No one in the hall dared to clap. No one dared to speak. The silence was heavy, crushing, yet powerful. All eyes were locked on Obiero, the man who had once been celebrated, now stripped bare before the truth. That night, the evidence didn't just defend Lena, it exposed the cruelty of a father who had failed to see the diamond shining in his own home. Mr. Obiero sat stiff in his chair, his hand gripping the edge of the table as if it could anchor him against the storm now raging in the hall. Only moments ago he had stood tall, his voice dripping with pride and authority as he mocked his daughter for the amusement of his guests. But now that same hall had turned into a courtroom, and every guest present had become a silent judge. For the first time in years, his confident mask cracked, his lips trembled slightly, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He could feel the weight of hundreds of stares pressing down on him, heavy with disappointment. The very colleagues who had once looked up to him now avoided his gaze. Some shook their heads in quiet disbelief, others whispered behind their hands, their words sharp enough to pierce the air. The relatives seated nearby leaned toward each other, murmuring about his arrogance. "How could he humiliate his own daughter like that?" one whispered. "After all she's done, he called her worthless," another said. The same man who had always commanded respect at family gatherings now found himself at the center of shame. Mr. Obiero's heart pounded, his chest tight with a feeling he had never allowed himself to admit: fear. Fear of losing the honor he had guarded all his life, fear of facing the truth that his pride had blinded him. He had built his reputation on discipline, success, and dignity, yet in a single evening, it was crumbling before his eyes. Every glance toward Lena felt like a stab. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't mocking him back, she wasn't even gloating. She just sat there with tears shining in her eyes, her face calm, her silence louder than any accusation. That silence hurt more than words ever could. Because in it, he saw her strength, and his failure as a father. His humiliation deepened when he noticed his oldest friends turning away. These were men who had once praised him, who had admired his work ethic, who had called him a role model. Now they couldn't even look him in the eye. Respect is hard-earned, but it can be lost in a moment, and Obiero felt it slipping away like sand through his fingers. The truth cornered him from all sides. The evidence Cato had shown was undeniable. The stories, the letters, the photographs. They all revealed the greatness of the daughter he had mocked, and no amount of denial could change that. His arrogance had not only wounded Lena but had also exposed his own emptiness. The man who had always stood at the center of applause now sat in the center of silence. The humiliation he had prepared for his daughter had returned to him, sharper and heavier than he could bear. For the first time Mr. Obiero felt small. The banker, the leader, the respected man of Makira was gone. What remained was only a father stripped of his pride, left to face the truth he could no longer run from. Lena rose slowly from her chair, her movements calm and graceful, though her heart was still racing. The hall, already tense with silence, shifted immediately. Every eye turned toward her, waiting to see if she would cry, lash out, or collapse under the weight of everything that had happened. But Lena did none of those things. She stood tall, her face steady, her voice soft yet strong enough to carry through the hall. She turned her gaze toward her father. For a moment, the years between them flashed in her mind. Years of trying to earn his approval, of working hard just to hear a single word of pride from him, of being compared to others and found lacking. And yet, despite all of that, she still loved him. That love made her words even more powerful. "I never wanted your money," she said softly, her voice trembling only at the edges. "I never wanted your praise. All I ever wanted was your respect. Just once, I wished you would look at me and see more than my failures. Just once, I wished you would see the heart behind everything I tried to do." The room grew even quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. Obiero could not meet her eyes. He shifted in his seat, his head lowered, his pride crumbling. Lena's eyes glistened with tears, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of finally speaking words she had held back for too long. She took a deep breath and continued. "Tonight proves something painful but true, that sometimes even a stranger can see your worth before your own father does." Gasps spread across the hall. The words pierced through the crowd, striking everyone with their honesty. Guests who had mocked her earlier now looked at her with awe. Many felt the sting of her pain as if it were their own. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly applause began, soft at first, then louder, until it rolled across the hall like thunder. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even with tears in their eyes. They weren't just applauding Lena's words. They were applauding her strength, her dignity, her courage to speak truth without cruelty. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't sought revenge, she hadn't tried to humiliate her father in return. Instead, she had risen above the insult, showing a grace that no one in that hall would ever forget. Cato looked at her with pride glowing in his eyes. To him she was already everything, but now the world could see it too. The applause grew louder, filling the room with a sound that drowned out the shame of Obiero's earlier mockery. And as Lena stood there, her hand steady by her side, she realized she no longer needed her father's validation. She had something far greater, her dignity, her truth, and the respect of everyone who had once doubted her. That night, she didn't just survive the humiliation, she transformed it into her greatest strength. The hall that had once echoed with laughter now pulsed with admiration. Guests began to rise from their seats, moving toward Lena as if drawn by an invisible force. The same people who had smirked and whispered when her father mocked her were now looking at her with respect in their eyes. Some even looked guilty, ashamed of how quickly they had joined in her humiliation earlier. One woman reached for Lena's hand, squeezing it warmly. "You are stronger than all of us," she whispered, her eyes wet with tears. Another guest, a well-known businessman, said aloud, "Lena, I would be honored to partner with you in your community projects." His words sparked a wave of offers. Donations, partnerships, promises of support. People who had once dismissed her were now eager to be connected with her vision. Lena stood in the middle of the crowd, her heart overwhelmed. She had never worked for recognition, yet tonight, it poured over her like a flood. Strangers praised her for her courage and her service, calling her an inspiration. Her husband's hand found hers, grounding her in the storm of emotions. For the first time she felt seen, not for her failures, not for her struggles, but for the quiet strength she had carried all along. Meanwhile, Mr. Obiero sat in his chair, still and silent. The proud man who once commanded every room now looked like a shadow of himself. His colleagues, the same men who had toasted him countless times before, avoided his eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably, whispering about his cruelty. Others simply ignored him, ashamed to even be associated with a man who had mocked his own daughter so publicly. The seat of honor he had once occupied now felt like a prison of humiliation. Cato's words had turned the night upside down, but it was Lena's grace that sealed the transformation. She had not lashed out, she had not sought revenge. She had chosen dignity, and that choice lifted her higher than any insult could ever pull her down. The people around her felt it. They didn't just see a daughter who had been mocked, they saw a woman who had risen above it all. The applause, the praise, the offers, all of it swirled through the hall like a tide. The same night that had begun with Lena's humiliation was ending with her victory. People whispered her name with admiration, calling her the woman of dignity, the daughter of strength, the voice of the voiceless. And Obiero, the man of the hour, sat alone at his own dinner. His name, once spoken with respect, was now overshadowed by his daughter's courage. The lesson was clear to everyone who witnessed it. Honor is not built by wealth or status. It is built by respect, humility, and love. And on that night, All of Makira saw who truly deserved the honor. Weeks after that unforgettable night, the story of the retirement dinner spread across every corner of Makira. Newspapers and blogs picked it up, calling Lena the daughter who silenced arrogance with grace. Videos of Kato's powerful toast and Lena's dignified words circulated on social media, touching hearts far beyond the city. People admired not just the truth that was spoken, but the calm, graceful way Lena had carried herself in the face of humiliation. Her father, once celebrated as a respected banker, now lived in quiet regret. The applause he had always craved was gone, replaced by whispers of disappointment. Wherever he went, people remembered not his long career, but the way he had mocked his daughter and how the truth had exposed him. The weight of that shame followed him, a reminder that pride can destroy even the strongest reputation. Lena, however, grew brighter with each passing day. Partnerships and donations flowed in, and her community projects expanded beyond Kasaira village. She and Kato opened more schools, supported more orphans, and became a source of hope for countless families. People no longer saw her as the daughter who failed, they saw her as a leader, a woman of dignity who turned pain into purpose. Whenever people spoke of that evening, they didn't call it Mr. Obiero's retirement dinner. They said with pride in their voices, that was the night of Lena's rise. It became a story told in homes, classrooms, and gatherings across Makira, a reminder that true respect is not demanded with titles, but earned through humility, sacrifice, and grace. And Lena's name became forever linked with the power of dignity over humiliation.